Fate Be Changed, Chapter 37, Merida. The kitchens at McCameron Castle buzzed with energy as the staff went about the preparations for the evening's feast. No one had mentioned it, but they all knew the significance of this gathering, this night. It was the final informal courting dinner before the princess's betrothal was officially announced. The girls who worked with Merida in the scullery could not contain their excitement. It was a constant stream of whispers and giggles and contented sighs. Merida did not share their enthusiasm. Her stomach felt as if it were tied into a million knots. She was unsure what to expect of tonight's meal. Was the king in danger? If someone employed in the castle was indeed behind the parlor incident, did they intend to finish the job that the suit of armor had failed to do? The knots in her stomach tightened. It wasn't until after Eleanor had left her in the corridor, once Merida had returned to the kitchens and noticed Sorcha carrying a bag of flour from the dry larder, that another thought hit her. The dessert that had been served in the end of the last meal the Frasers attended. She recalled how Eileen had made King Douglas a special cake, and how the king had fallen ill soon after. Had that been the first attempt on his life? It was unfathomable, yet it was clear that Eileen was involved in whatever was going on here, and that whatever it was nothing good. Another intense flash of fury swelled within her chest. Merida wrapped her arms around her torso as if she could shield herself from the wave of panic and uncontrollable rage that had begun to crash over her. She feared that what she had hoped was only a foolish notion was in fact a very real threat. The king was indeed in danger. She could no longer disregard that unnerving feeling that crept up when she stumbled upon Eileen and Lachlan, or when she had overheard the maid speaking with the man who had been sent by Lachlan to spy on the princess and with Gregory. It had taken her a while to recall where she had heard his name, but finally it came to her that Gregory was Eileen's brother. Eleanor had mentioned that Eileen's brother was the one who had taught them how to use the secret entrance to get into the Bailey. Even the way Eileen looked at the princess, with thinly veiled contempt, should have been a clue that the girl had been up to something. But these were all just suspicions, of course. Merida found herself in the same position she had been in all along, that of an outsider attempting to level serious charges against two longtime members of McCameron Castle's staff. If she imparted everything she knew and suspected to the princess, would Eleanor even believe her? It was a chance she had to take. If something were to happen to the king, Merida would never forgive herself. And what if it did not stop with the king? What if Eleanor and Queen Katerina were also in danger? Merida glanced at the girls at the wash basin. She figured she could slip out of the scullery without any of them noticing. They were too busy chatting and laughing and not paying any attention to her. But before she could leave, Sorcha bounced into the room with a huge smile on her face. "'Tis time to go," she said. The other girls let out a loud squeal, set down the dishes they had been drying, and scurried out of the room. "Go where?" Merida asked with caution. "Did no one tell you? We all have to act as servers tonight." Oh, goodness, not again. The last time she served the royal family their meal, she had made a mess of things. And that was before she had to hide the hair and claws that continued to grow, no matter how much she tried to stop them. "Why so?" Merida asked. "Because half the kitchen staff is getting the food ready for the Highland Games. 'Tis tradition that the king and queen provide a hearty meal for the clans that attend the games." "Where are they preparing the meals for the games? I should like to help." It was preferable to the great hall. Sorcha was shaking her head. "Do not worry, lass. You will get to help with that too. It takes a lot to feed hundreds of hungry warriors, but not yet. You are needed in the great hall. Let us go." Merida hesitated a moment, wondering if it was too late to feign a sudden stomach ailment, but Sorcha was already on her way out of the scullery. "'Tis no use," Merida said with a sigh. There was at least one upside to serving the royal family at dinner tonight. She would be able to keep an eye on Lachlan Fraser. She just hoped she could keep control of herself. If there was anyone who could trigger the sudden powerful fury that had begun surging within her, it was her mother's future betrothed. By the time Merida arrived in the kitchens, platters of roasted pheasant, venison stew, and pickled herring were making their way out of the great hall. "Where have you been?" Eileen snapped. Merida jumped. She could not form words as she stared at the woman who was possibly in the process of committing treason against McCameron Kingdom. What would cause a person to turn against their own? Eileen shoved a bowl of roasted beast into Merida's hands. "Take that out." As she entered the great hall, Merida noticed that those seated at the table were in the same positions they'd occupied several nights ago. However, there were 3 additional guests. A young girl who looked to be 2 or 3 years younger than Merida's 16 years, and a young man about her age sat on opposite sides of Lachlan. Merida could tell by their strong jawlines and tawny hair that the 3 were related. They must have been his siblings. It stood to reason that the demure woman to the chieftain's right was his wife. Their presence was yet another indication of the importance of this meal, a sign that these 2 families were on the precipice of being tied together. A marriage to this man could not be her mother's fate. Merida felt Queen Katerina's eyes on her as she followed the other girls to the table. For once, she wished the queen would question her presence so that she could tell her it was at Eileen's bidding that she had been called to serve. But the queen remained silent. Her regal nose lifted as she tracked Merida's steps, then settled on her gloves. Merida set the beets on the table and soundlessly retreated, returning to the kitchen to bring out another dish. One by one, they would clear the plates of those enjoying their dinner, finished each course. Merida's stomach growled with pangs as she watched the McCameron and Fraser's feast. She was not even particularly hungry, having already eaten the dinner of boiled carrots, turnips, and venison scraps, the meat a welcome surprise. But she was hungry for the scene taking place before her. She had taken the joys of sharing a meal with her family for granted. Not for the first time, an overwhelming sense of homesickness stole over her. But this time, Merida was not so sure she would get home, if there would be a home to go to even. She closed her eyes, shutting out thoughts of what would become of her life, of her entire existence, if she posed the question that had been swirling in her head to Eleanor. Despite her growing affection for Fergus, if given the choice, she would truly choose not to marry anyone at all. Merida's eyes shot open when she heard Lachlan's low voice informing the table that he needed to be excused. She studied him as he rose from his seat. "I shall return in a moment," Merida whispered to Sorcha. The girl eyed her curiously, but when Merida put a hand to her stomach, indicating that she needed the privy chamber, Sorcha stifled a laugh and nodded for her to be on her way. Merida quickly slipped out of the great hall. She caught sight of Lachlan's tall frame just as he turned the corner. Her heart hammering, she scurried down the corridor, moving as swiftly and quietly as she could. She halted in surprise when she saw Lachlan enter the privy chamber, having been certain that he'd used it only as an excuse to see Eileen. Maybe Eileen was already there. Maybe they had made previous plans to meet between the 2nd and 3rd courses. Merida slipped between one of the suits of armor and the wall, then waited for Lachlan to emerge. When he did, after a few minutes, she remained in her hiding place, anticipating Eileen's exit from the privy, but no one else left the small chamber. Merida looked up and down the corridor before stepping down from behind the armor and tiptoed to the privy chamber. Her blood pounded in her ears. Sweat formed in her gloved palms. That anxious feeling in her stomach intensified, the knots twisting and tightening, leaving her breathless. What would she say if she encountered Eileen or Gregory or the spy? She had been working in McCameron Castle too long to use ignorance of the castle's layout as an excuse, or to pretend that she did not know that the staff was not to use the same privy that guests used. She would figure something out. This was too important to allow fear to get in her way. But when she entered the privy, it was empty. Empty. Lachlan Fraser had not left dinner for a clandestine meeting with one of his cohorts. Merida knew she should be relieved, but instead it only made her more anxious and confused. What if she had been wrong about Lachlan? Could the conversation she had overheard between Eileen and the others have had nothing to do with Queen Douglas or the princess? She had heard their names mentioned, but it was possible that it was nothing untoward. Eileen had said that whatever was to be done needed to take place when the other clans were around. What if Lachlan was planning some grand gesture for Eleanor that was tied to the betrothal announcement, and he wanted to make sure that all the kingdoms were there to witness it? A surprise gift for the princess would also explain why he had been whispering with Eileen in the corridor if he had asked her to coordinate it. And here Merida was, accusing them of treason. What was the penalty for bringing a false accusation against someone? She did not want to find out. As she returned to the great hall, Merida fell in line with the others, taking one of the dishes Sorcha carried from her hands. "Your stomach still troubling you, lass? You do not have the flux, do you?" the girl whispered. Merida shook her head. I think I ate too much of the venison. It had been so long since I had a piece of meat. I got a bit carried away. Ah, Sorcha nodded. Too much of a good thing ain't always good for you. They carried the dishes to the table, serving what must have been the fourth course. The king, Chieftain Fraser, and Lachlan discussed the upcoming Highland Games, while the women sat quietly, picking at their meals. Well, most of the women. Queen Katerina would not allow anyone to silence her. She added to the commentary, remarking on the past year's winners and predicting which member of Clan McCameron would prove to be victorious this year. Just as the dinner seemed to be winding down, the chieftain said, "There is one more thing I would like to discuss with you, King Douglas." The king casually ran his thumb along the rim of his glasses. "And what would that be?" The chieftain looked first to his wife and then to his son. "We think it best that we do away with the reading of the wedding banns." Eleanor dropped her fork. The clatter rang throughout the great hall. "Sorry," Eleanor mumbled. "Why would we do away with the reading of the wedding banns?" Queen Katerina asked. "It is tradition." Merida wanted to know the same. It was more than just a tradition. The public proclamation of an impending marriage was required by the church. The couple's intentions were made known 3 weeks prior to the wedding to allow any objections to the union to be made. It was unheard of to ignore this practice. Traditions stand only because they are not challenged, and the children have been promised since birth. There is no mystery that they shall be betrothed. Besides, Douglas is the king. He can challenge the tradition. "Why would he?" the queen asked. "What reason is there to not read the banns?" Ignoring the queen's questions, the chieftain looked to King Douglas. "Think about the show of strength it would present if Princess Eleanor and Lachlan were to marry at the Highland Games. And then, in a few weeks' time, we will hold a splendid gathering celebrating their nuptials." "Are you suggesting the wedding take place at the Games?" the king asked. "Yes. This union between the McCamerons and the Frasers on display for all the kingdom to see, it would fortify the alliance between our clans." Merida watched as the blood seemed to drain from Eleanor's face. "That does sound appealing," the king said. "Douglas," Queen Katerina said, "think of the implications. People will assume she's getting married so soon because she must get married so soon." Eleanor's pale cheeks instantly reddened at the queen's words. "No one would dare make such claims to the princess," the chieftain said. "But they would make them behind her back," the queen retorted. "Speculation would spread throughout the villages and surrounding clans like wildfire." "Not if I say there will be no speculation." "You overestimate your power as king. You cannot change what people think. That is enough." The king slammed his hand on the wooden table. The queen's face was a mask of stone, but the cold fury burning in her eyes told Merida exactly what she felt about the king's pronouncement, and possibly about the king himself. King Douglas looked to the chieftain. "I shall think about this overnight. We will revisit it tomorrow, at the start of the games."